Hey guys, thanks for joining me on my Katie's Dad channel. Today I really wanted to talk about how it affects me, what it's like to be the loved one of somebody who is mentally ill, and my thoughts on it, and just little things that I go through being on the sidelines, experiencing what he experiences on my end, and how I'm affected. So something that I didn't know and I found out through my dad's sister is that the whole time that we were separated, when my dad was living alone in an apartment by himself, he was in and out of the hospital. He was not doing good mentally, and maybe you guys know this already, but loneliness is very depressing for the average person. So to throw in my dad's mental illness, for him to be alone in an apartment by himself, alone with his thoughts, it was really rough on him, and he was in and out of the hospital for years, for the whole time that we were separated, and I had no idea. After I did knock on his door, after we did reunite, I right away was able to see just how his mental illness had been affecting him. My dad actually would enjoy going to the hospital because it was like a safe place for him. It was somewhere where he was completely taken care of. He had all of his meals right there for him. So for him to be living alone and then to go into the hospital and feel very taken care of and to be seeing doctors and psychiatrists, he actually kind of would depend on the hospital, and anytime he would really just be freaking out in his head, he would immediately want to go to the hospital. The reason I'm not a big fan of it is because they would just readjust his meds so much that they would over-medicate him. They didn't know the effects of what was going to happen with these meds, and it obviously wasn't working because time and time again my dad would go back. And even after we reunited in 2019 was one of the worst years that I experienced him being in and out of the hospital, because he would go like every other month. Like, it was at least half a dozen times that he had gone, and like I said, I visit him once a week. If that week he was in the hospital, I would take the trip to whatever hospital he was at. Sometimes it would be in one place, sometimes it would be a different place. I would always take the trip there, and I would go there and I would visit him in the hospital, just sitting in a room and just talking to him and seeing how he's doing, and he loved that. So every time he would go, it was so hard on me. I would take it really hard because I was just so sad that he was struggling. For those first 2 years after my dad and I reunited, he was not doing well mentally. So even having me back in his life, even our weekly visits and talking all the time every day, it was not enough to help him mentally and to keep him out of the hospital. Something that I would do with him was, I wasn't about quick fixes. I wasn't about trying to distract him so much. I was trying to get to the root of the problems. Like, if he was upset about something that was totally illogical, something that would never happen, he would be upset about all the time. Like, his mind would tell him things that weren't true. His mind would just go to a very dark place, and he would get deeper and deeper in those thoughts, and he wasn't able to pull himself out of it. He was scared of going out in public because he thought that if he had any sort of mental freak out in public, he thought he was going to get arrested for whatever reason. And there was a lot of visits for the first 2 years that when we hung out. A lot of those visits, Dad would be upset. Even like right when I picked him up, he was already upset, and we had plans to go do all these things. We used to do so many different things in one visit. We would go out to eat, we would go grocery shopping, we would go to Starbucks, we would go to the pet store to visit bunnies, and there would be a lot of times where we weren't able to go anywhere or do anything until he was in a better mood, because he wasn't going to enjoy any of that until we broke him out of those intrusive thoughts that he was having. So what we would do was, I would have him come in the car with me, and we would sit in the car, sometimes for half an hour, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for over an hour, just him and I going back and forth, trying to get to the root of what is really bothering him. And I came up with the strategy where this isn't about that thing that you're talking about. This is about the fact that you have these intrusive thoughts. It's the fact that your mind is against you. And I was trying to work with him on the strategy of, one, acknowledging that he's having these intrusive thoughts, to trying to cut them off from the start as soon as you possibly can. Cut those intrusive thoughts off because they're not true and they're only going to harm you. They don't want what's best for you. I want what's best for you, okay? And that's stuff that I would tell them all the time. So one, I just really want you to acknowledge that you're having those intrusive thoughts, like, oh my God, like they're happening. You need to acknowledge the fact that they're happening so you don't go down further, deeper into that rabbit hole. So acknowledge it, cut it off as soon as possible. Get it out of your head as soon as possible. Say, no, I'm not going to think about that. And I was trying to convince him that he did have control over his thoughts. And then the third thing that I was working on him with was replacing those thoughts. Once you cut off those negative thoughts, replace it with positive thoughts. And I was trying to give him all these different resources to where he, even if he couldn't think of positive things on his own, he could reach for these resources, like that self-help journal I gave him, the activity binder I gave him. I made him a big poster of all of our pictures on him. He had a lot of different things that he could reach for to give him positive thoughts, and I wanted him to practice on his own. I was able to think of a lot of different positive things that he could think of, but I was always pushing him to think of those on his own because I wanted him to practice that, practice having these positive thoughts, so that way if I'm not around, if he's struggling on his own, he has that practice and those resources to fight it on his own. So the thing about my dad, and that's something that's very true for a lot of us, is that we are in the habit of having negative thoughts, of thinking of the negative, of harping and focusing on the negative things, and not only just having negative thoughts, but allowing them to go from one to the next, to go from a little thought is now deeper and deeper and deeper, and aiding that thought, making everything worse in your head. And my dad has decades and decades of making that a habit and just going immediately to that. It's almost automatic where it's just negative. So my focus was to try to break that habit and form a new habit, practice now doing the same thing but with positive thoughts. We all experience it. We all go through those kind of things, and it's just automatic. It's a habit for us, and the only way we're going to break it is if we practice and change that habit into the positive stuff. And that's something that even I had to learn and I had to work on. Dad, he was fed up with fighting. He was just so done with fighting that he actually switched. It was over a year ago where he switched to these very heavy meds. And these meds, they're harmful to the body. I did some research on it, and they are harmful to the body. And it's really something that I'm against him being on. But I'm not gonna lie, these meds really did help him mentally, helped him be a lot more positive, but it was almost like he was high. Like, that's why he was able to be happy, because he was high. He wasn't able to have any negative thoughts just because it probably just like surged his dopamine and really just turned him into a new person. And something about those meds that really upsets me is I can see how deteriorating, how much it affected his body. It just has been his body has been slowly declining ever since he changed to these heavy meds. And yes, I will admit that he has been mentally better. He doesn't go deep into these negative thoughts like he used to, but he's also not able to do physical things like he used to. He used to come in the car, buckle his seatbelt fine. He used to be able to walk around fine and great. You know, him and I, we've been mini golfing. We did all these things that now I can't see him doing anymore. Now it's a struggle for him to get his jacket off. It's a struggle for him to buckle his seatbelt. This is something that was upsetting. He wasn't telling me, but he was falling all the time. And he didn't tell me because he didn't want to worry me, but also I have a feeling that he didn't want me to tell him, hey, it's these meds. Hey, you need to get off these meds, you know, because he really enjoyed the fact that he didn't have to fight mentally anymore. But I'm trying to tell him and convince him that if you don't have your physical health, it's not going to matter how happy you are. It's not going to matter that you're no longer thinking of negative things because you are unable to do things physically. So this medicine, at first, it was really helping him mentally, but then eventually his mind and his body got used to the medicine to the point where Dad's intrusive thoughts were coming back, and he was able to get his psychiatrist to agree to have them increase these heavy meds. And once he increased them, and I begged him not to, but he did it, and once he increased them, I supported him. I supported him because I really had no choice. But once he increased them, it's like I could see such a difference in his body. His face looked different. He didn't even look like the same guy. He wasn't able to have facial expressions like he did, and his movements were very slow, very limited, and it was heartbreaking to me, to the point where Dad himself mentally was almost like zombie-like. He was just not even able to have normal conversations. It was heartbreaking for me. And Dad eventually noticed it too, that he was too much of a zombie. And I'll give you an example of how he was kind of in a zombie state. Every single week for years since I've reunited with my dad, I always come in my car, pick him up in my car, and we spent a lot of time in my car. Now, when he was on these heavy meds, we were driving in my car, and he was so out of it that he looked at my boyfriend and he said, "Whose car are we in right now?" He was so out of it mentally that he didn't even know whose car he was in. He didn't know where he was. He since has gone back and decreased that medicine because he himself noticed that he was too much of a zombie. He was getting fed up with that stuff, so he decided to decrease his meds. He's still on those heavy meds, but way less than at that point when he was feeling like a zombie. He decided on his own, I need to stop this. I, of course, fully supported that. But I'm not gonna lie, recently, he, again, was fighting it and fighting these thoughts, and he decided to get back on some more meds again, and it's just sad because even today for Thanksgiving, I get sad. It's really hard, like, to see my dad struggle so much physically, and to be honest with you, I would much rather help him mentally than help him physically, because I know I can do something. I know that he's okay in general. I know that there's something I can do to help with the mental, but when it comes to him physically struggling, there's not anything I can do. I soak it all in. I love our time together, but I really can't help but to be sad seeing him not able to do things that he was just able to do a year ago, a year and a half ago. He was a completely different person physically. And yes, mentally he was different too, but it's really hard for me. And I just want to say, anybody out there watching this video, if you have a loved one that's struggling and you feel like you're failing or you feel like you're not doing enough, it's not true. I just want you to know that as long as you're doing all you can, as long as you're showing them your love and your support, that is enough. And you are making a huge difference in their lives. You really are. And please don't ever think you're failing if you can't make them feel better or if you can't fix them, because you being in their life is all you can do and all they need. And just please do not give up on them. I'm just a much better and stronger person because of my dad, and I wouldn't have it any other way.